So basically, the double slash is the root node. We're saying we're going to start at anything. It doesn't have to be a specific tag. It could be anything. That's what this asterisk means. It doesn't have to be a div. It doesn't have to be a span. Doesn't have to be a table or whatever. We're finding the class of that object, and then we're going from there. We're going to the table body, table row, table data, and then we're selecting the second table data. And we're looping over each of those items, and then we're going relatively from what this actually is and selecting sub-elements of that. And if we were to do like double /a, we wouldn't be selecting sub-elements of this Xpath up here, because whenever you do a double slash, that's telling the Xpath engine to select from the root node of the actual document itself, which in this case I believe would be this HTML node. So it's saying, hey, if you're using a double slash, select, you know, anything inside this grander HTML tag. That way, well, you can get like broad scope stuff, and that is useful in its own place, but in this case, I don't want to do that. I'm looping over each thing intentionally and trying to grab specific data from each of those table data rows. Sorry. Yeah, and then I'm calling extract on each one, and I'm selecting the first item in several of these because, as you may or may not know, when you're extracting data using XPaths in Scrapy, it by default extracts it to a list item, not a string, you know, not a dictionary. It's a list. So I'm selecting the first item in the list because on most of these I either want the first item or it only has one item to begin with, so it's not really an issue. And then down here, I am making a request object. I think I covered this in my last video, but if not, I'll explain how it goes either way. So basically, I'm calling Scrapy request, which is one of its built-in functions, and I'm selecting what I just set as the actual URL for each of these videos, which is, you know, in this case, for Shawshank Redemption, The Godfather, etc. Each of these has a link to the actual page that describes it. So I'm pulling that out using an XPath, so I'm selecting its a href element, and in this request object I'm setting the first item is the URL that you want to request, and that is set right there. And then the second item is the callback, and the callback is a function you want to call to actually parse the data that's pulled in. So in this case, let's say Shawshank Redemption, it's actually calling a function to parse this page. And I've defined that function as parse movie details, which is described right here, and that function has to take two items. It takes the self object, which is just, you know, a reference to this class. If you're familiar with other languages, self is also known as this in other languages, and it's just a pointer to the class object itself, so you can actually define things on the class. I won't get into that too much because that's for another discussion later. Okay, so yeah, that's the callback. It's calling this function over here. And then right here I'm setting request meta, which is extra data that you can send with each request. And in this case, I'm actually sending the item that we defined up here as the meta so that I can keep going with this movie info item, because I don't want to lose what I've started here, and because it becomes kind of tricky when you're collecting data to keep in context what data is associated with which title. So I'm just passing that along, and I'm going to just keep using this movie item, I guess. Okay, so that's that. And then per for loop, I'm actually yielding, which is different from a return. Yielding is like a return, but it happens each time it runs instead of actually quitting the function before, after the first return, which is what a return would do. Say, if you actually wrote return request right here, that would actually kill this for loop the second it hits the first return. And it would actually then just only return one item. And instead, we're saying, hey, yield, keep looping through this and actually run this function each time you yield it. That way, you actually are requesting every single page on this list instead of just the first one, which is not what you want. You want to request every page. So that's that. This is the callback function. I'll walk you through what that does. So first of all, we're retrieving the item that we sent through the meta in this function up here. And then we are extending this. Each of these functions is adding more data to the item object itself, and then finally returning it at the bottom of this function. But let's walk through some of these functions. Alright, let me walk you through the Xpath right here real quick, because this is kind of special to IMDB, and it actually is really convenient in a lot of ways, and I wish they did it more. And that is, let me inspect element so that I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. So for instance, we're actually trying to find this director name because that could be useful data, and it's kind of fun to collect it. And as you can see, it's inside of a span with a class, and this class unfortunately is used all over the place, so you can't use that as the way of accessing this actual value. So the only unique thing about this, to access it easily, is this Itemprop equals name, which actually is a unique identifier on this page, I believe. And I've kind of drilled down to make sure it's unique by doing div Itemprop a span text, and I'm extracting that. So you can actually do, I didn't realize this until today. I always thought you could only do spans, or not spans, classes or IDs in here at the at span, at class, at ID, etc. But it turns out that you can actually do whatever you want. You could do at Itemprop, which is a unique thing to IMDB, I'm fairly sure. And that allows you to actually get a unique identifier for the director, for instance. Oh, wait. It's actually at Itemprop director. That's the unique one. If it's at Itemprop name, I think that's used all over the place, so that's why I didn't actually use that in the spider itself. Same thing with creator, description, genre, all those things. They're all unique. They're not a class, they're not an ID, they're actually its own property element. So that's how I access that. You could easily do a asterisk here, but I decided to go with div because it's more specific, and from what I've seen, there's no pages that don't follow that kind of rule. So it's pretty simple. And I'm just extracting the data from each of these fields and returning them. And up here, I'm assigning item to that. And this function itself is actually taking items. So all it's really doing is just extending this item. Then down here, this is the cast member item function. And this is a little more kind of complex. I'll walk you through how this works. So first of all, I'm defining cast member as an empty array so that I can use this append function, because otherwise I think it'll throw an error or something. I'm looping through this Xpath, which is title cast. Let's see if we can see that. believe, yeah, so it's this. And since it's an ID, in most cases, most people that write web pages use IDs as unique identifiers, which is kind of a standard. So in juxtaposition to a class, which is usually used all over the place. So what that means is this ID, you're pretty much guaranteed is going to be unique for this page. So you're probably not going to have any other elements with the same ID, which means that I can actually access this and be pretty assured that that's the only thing that I'm going to be pulling, which is a good thing. We want uniqueness when making XPaths so that we don't accidentally pull data we weren't intending to get. So I'm pulling from title cast, table, and table row, and I'm looping over each element, and that in the table row is, as you may guess, the actual cast member item, like this. So each table row is, you know, the picture, their name, and their character's name. So I'm pulling, I'm looping over each of those because each one is going to be a different character or a different actor in the list. And I've done this, which is if the index, which is defined here and is populated by this enumerate function, if it's equal to 0, meaning we're on the first row, which is right here, this is the first row in this table, we're going to skip over it because obviously it doesn't have any sort of cast information, and that's just going to confuse our parser, and we don't need that. So we skip over that, and then we define our cast item, which we have built here, which is the cast name, the character name, the ranking, and we populate each one. So the ranking is just the index, and that's basically just saying, hey, number 1 is kind of the most important actor in this movie, number 2 is the second most, etc., all the way down until we get to the bottom. I didn't use full cast just because that adds more complexity, and I wanted this to be, you know, tolerably reasonable. I may add that in either later tutorials or to just the repo itself if you guys are interested, but for now it's moderately simple.